So smartphone cameras won't really ever compare to a mirrorless or a DSLR, but you'd actually be quite surprised at what they can do. I recently did some tests to see the true capabilities of my Samsung S20 Plus. Hello, how's it going? So I recently met up with my mum and brother just to go for a social distanced walk, about 10 minutes away from my house, a place called Whitwell Woods. So I thought I'd set myself a little challenge and was considering taking my camera because it had just been snowing, maybe get some footage or some photos or something, but then I thought I should probably just take my phone and see what I can get. So I have the Samsung S20 Plus, and I did a little bit of research before I bought it. I had a look for some cinematic sort of B-roll reels. Saw a few decent ones, but those people had kind of used a gimbal, some sort of stabilizer, so I kind of just wanted to use the phone itself. Bit of a challenge, didn't know what I would really expect. Quite pleased with the results. So what I did was I didn't want to use any third-party apps either. So for those that don't know, there's actually a mode within the camera app on this phone called Pro Video. So if you scroll across to more once you're in the app, and you'll find it on this screen here, but what I've actually done is just dragged it from here. If you press and hold, you can drag it and stick it down there, so it's easier to get to. So within the Pro Video mode, you're actually able to change a lot more settings than if you were just in the normal video mode. For example, shutter speed, ISO. You can obviously go in and change the resolution and frame rate, which I did, and I picked out two resolutions / frame rates that I wanted to use, which were 1080p at 120 frames per second and 4K at 60 frames a second. I mostly used the 4K, but I wanted to see how good the 120 frames footage looked. So the only problem I had with this is that you can only select 30 frames, 60 frames, 24 frames, or 120 frames. So I usually film at 25 frames or 50 frames, me being in the UK, PAL. So I had to stick with 60 frames, 120. I'm actually filming this video at 30 frames a second, which is a bit strange for me, but we'll go with it. So within the app, if you have changed the settings on your Pro Video size, if you've changed it anything higher than 24 frames a second, you unfortunately can't go in and change your picture profile, which would have been absolutely perfect for me if I was able to up the frame rate to get a little bit more of a slow motion shot. But then to be able to shoot at more of a flat picture profile, that would have been ideal. But I thought it was probably more important for me to be able to shoot at a higher frame rate rather than the flat picture profile, as I could do a little bit in Premiere Pro afterwards to try and achieve that kind of cinematic look afterwards as best as I can. Obviously, because I've changed the frame rate, I want to be changing the shutter speed to double the frame rate to get the most kind of natural motion blur. Nothing too jittery, nothing too sort of smudgy. So at 60 frames per second, you can get it to 125th of a second, and at 120 frames per second, you can get it at 1/250th. So it's not quite double, but it'll be close enough. So in terms of settings, that's kind of what I was going for. I left the auto white balance turned on. I kind of wanted to give the phone a bit of a chance to decide with that. Focus, I used mainly auto, but a few shots I decided to go in and use the manual focus. So that's about it as far as the phone camera was concerned. Whenever I bring my camera out with me, I always bring a little portable microphone, just in case I decided to record little bits of Foley, little sound clips, anything that I might want to use for B-roll shots and things like that. Instead, I decided to use the sound recorder on the phone itself, which was okay, about as good as I kind of expected it to be. So there's a couple of little sound clips that I used within the sequence as well. So as I mentioned before, I recorded in 2 different resolutions and 2 different frame rates. So we've got one bin that has 4K 60 frames per second footage in, and another one with 1080p at 120 frames per second. So within this sequence here, I decided to use a mixture of the 2. They are mainly the 4K clips, but there's a few of the 1080p clips that actually looked pretty decent. So I'm going to turn off the effects, global effects mute, just to show you what the actual raw sort of footage looks like. I will obviously play this whole sequence. This was a particular shot that I was pleased with. This is one of the 4K shots. So for this shot, I actually used manual focus. I decided I wanted to leave the focus locked and use the camera to kind of move around and change the focus, as you can kind of see. But I was just kind of blown away by how decent it looked for that shot in particular. The amount of bokeh you're actually getting on a phone, it kind of blows my mind. I think the lens itself is a 1.8, could be wrong. It looks like something like that. Again, another very well separated subject. Very impressed. So some of these wider shots, obviously fine, nothing wrong with them. This is one of the 1080p 120 frames slow-mo shots. So this is the raw footage itself, just slowed down to 25% speed, and you can actually see how much. I'm just going to mute some of this stuff for now. How decent that actually looks. Surprisingly good for a phone, especially the steam coming from the cup, which I was really impressed with. So if I turn back on the global effects, I didn't actually want to do too much in terms of effects for these clips. So as you can see, I've got 2 adjustment layers above here. One of them is simply a crop, just to give the different aspect ratio, and the other one is just lumetri color. All I've got is basic correction changed. I warmed up the footage a little bit, brought down the highlights, brought up the shadows, just to get a little bit more dynamic range and reduce the saturation. Kind of all I did really. I wanted to kind of leave it because I don't want to start pulling stuff too far as it does start to kind of deteriorate. I did actually reduce the sharpness as well, as most phones nowadays actually over sharpen footage, and I don't really like the look of that. I also didn't use any stabilization in Premiere. So there are a few clips here of audio which I recorded with the sound recorder or voice recorder. Some of it was usable. It was quite windy, so I didn't have any sort of wind guard. As you can hear, quite a lot of wind noise. But I did manage to get a few footsteps, which I split into different samples. Nice little bits of squelchy mud, which I then synced up to footsteps, which you'll later see in the video, and a little bit of running water. This was a stream. So I will now play you the finished product. So like I said, mixture of 4K and 1080p upscaled clips. So here we go. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I was actually very impressed with the results considering it's a phone. So if you found this video enjoyable, informative, interesting, then please give it a like, and please consider subscribing as well. And if you do, then hit the notification bell as well. And I will see you in the next one.